The GPS lost signal somewhere around the third unmarked turnoff, leaving me to navigate by the hand-drawn map the estate attorney had mailed along with the keys. I'd been driving for 11 hours, the last two on roads that seemed designed to discourage visitors. Narrow switchbacks carved into mountainsides, pavement giving way to gravel, then to dirt rutted deep enough to scrape my car's undercarriage. The forest on either side pressed close, a tangle of oak and hickory and pine so dense that even at 2 in the afternoon, the light filtering through had a greenish submarine quality. I'm Sarah Chen, 28 years old, formerly of Chicago, formerly employed as a graphic designer at a firm that downsized me out of existence 6 months ago. Formerly engaged to Marcus, who decided that my unemployment made me not the partner he'd envisioned for his future. The breakup and the job loss had come within 3 weeks of each other. A 1-2 punch that left me drowning in credit card debt and living in a studio apartment I could no longer afford. When the lawyer's letter arrived informing me that I'd inherited property in Harlan County, Kentucky from my great-grandmother May Chen, born May Holloway before she married my great-grandfather, I'd seen it as providence. I would stay just long enough to clean the place out, list it with a realtor, and use the proceeds to restart my life somewhere cheaper, somewhere I could breathe again. The farmhouse appeared suddenly around a final bend, as if the road had been deliberately concealing it until the last possible moment. It was a 2-story structure of weathered clapboard, the white paint aged to gray with a sagging front porch and a tin roof that had oxidized to a mottled rust brown. The windows were dark, their panes reflecting the surrounding forest in a way that made them look less like glass and more like pools of standing water. Behind the house, fields stretched perhaps 100 yards before the tree line resumed. Not the tidy, prosperous fields I'd seen along the highway, but overgrown tangles of what might once have been crops, now gone wild. I parked in the circular drive, the gravel crunching under my tires obscenely loud in the stillness. I sat for a moment after killing the engine, listening. No birdsong, no wind through the leaves. Nothing. The silence felt deliberate, watchful, as if the land itself were taking my measure. The keys worked smoothly in the lock. Someone had been maintaining the place, I realized, though the lawyer hadn't mentioned a caretaker. Inside, the house smelled of lemon oil and old wood underlaid with something herbal and medicinal. The interior was a time capsule. Floral wallpaper from the 1950s, doilies on every surface, a rotary phone still mounted to the kitchen wall. But everything was clean, organized, preserved with an almost religious care. On the kitchen table, positioned exactly in the center as if waiting for me, lay a yellowed envelope with my name written across it in spidery handwriting I recognized from birthday cards received throughout my childhood. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the writing dense and careful. Dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, I have passed beyond the veil. And this house and its responsibilities are now yours. What I must tell you will sound like the ravings of a superstitious old woman, and perhaps that's what you'll choose to believe. But I am 103 years old, and I have outlived everyone I ever loved by following these rules without exception. Your grandmother Margaret, my only daughter, thought them foolish when she visited in 1973. She survived but was never the same. I pray you are wiser. The rules of the house. 1. Never open the door after sunset, no matter who or what calls to you. 2. Leave a bowl of milk and a piece of bread on the back porch every night before dark. Do not watch as it is taken. 3. Do not look directly at the woods during dusk. If you must be outside at that hour, keep your eyes on the ground. 4. Never whistle, sing, or make music of any kind after darkness falls. 5. If you find objects moved or rearranged in the morning, do not speak of it aloud. 6. The room at the end of the upstairs hallway must remain locked. Do not open it, Do not attempt to look inside. 7. If you hear your name called from the woods, it is never who you think it is. Do not answer. Do not investigate. 8. Sleep with a light burning in your room. Complete darkness invites them in. 9. During the 3 nights of the new moon in October, you must not sleep. You must keep every light in the house burning. You must read the old words aloud every hour. The old words are in the Bible in the locked room. If October comes and you do not understand, find Earl. He will help you. These rules are not superstition, Sarah. They are a covenant as old as this land. Follow them and you will be safe. Break them, and you will learn why your family has kept this house for 4 generations. With love and hope, Great-Grandmother May. I read the letter twice, then a 3rd time, waiting for my brain to produce a rational explanation. Dementia, I thought. She was 103. Her mind must have been going at the end. This was the sad decline of a once sharp woman into paranoia and delusion. I set the letter aside and almost laughed, the sound strange and too loud in the quiet kitchen. But I didn't throw the letter away. And when I went upstairs to explore the bedrooms, I didn't try the handle of the door at the end of the hallway, even though every rational part of me wanted to dismiss the whole thing as nonsense. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent toward the tree line. I watched from the bedroom window as the quality of light changed. The shadows lengthening, the forest seeming to edge closer to the house. And though I told myself I was being ridiculous, influenced by a dead woman's delusions and my own exhaustion from the drive, I made sure I was inside with the doors locked well before the last light faded from the sky. I busied myself with unpacking, deliberately avoiding thoughts of the letter, of the rules, of the suffocating silence that pressed against the windows. The house had electricity but no internet, no cell signal. I'd known this coming in, one of the reasons the property value would be lower. The isolation that had seemed like a minor inconvenience that morning now felt absolute. I was alone in a way I'd never experienced in Chicago, where humanity pressed close on every side, where you were never more than a shout away from help. At 6:30, as purple dust gathered in the eastern sky, I heard a vehicle approaching. A battered pickup truck, older than I was, pulled into the drive. The man who climbed out moved with the careful stiffness of advanced age, but his eyes were sharp and assessing as they took me in. He wore work clothes that had been washed 1,000 times, a flannel shirt despite the warmth, and a baseball cap with a feed store logo. "You'd be Sarah," he said, not a question. "I'm Earl Holloway. Your great-grandmother was my cousin. I live down the road a piece." He gestured vaguely toward the tree line. "Wanted to come by, see if you needed anything. Pay my respects." I invited him in, grateful for another human presence. We sat at the kitchen table. He noticed the letter immediately, though I'd turned it face down, and I made coffee from supplies I found in the cupboard. The normalcy of the ritual was comforting. "Place looks just like I remember," Earl said, his weathered hands wrapped around the mug. "May kept it up good right to the end. You planning to stay or sell?" "Sell," I said, maybe too quickly. "I'm just here to get it ready for the market, sort through her things." He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Then his eyes drifted to the letter. "She leave you the rules?" The question caught me off guard. I flipped the letter over and Earl's face grew grave as he recognized the handwriting. "You read them?" "I read them," I said, and despite myself I laughed, a nervous, embarrassed sound. Look, I understand she was old and old people sometimes." "Stop!" Earl's voice was sharp, commanding in a way I hadn't expected. "Stop right there before you say something that marks you as a fool. Your great-grandmother was sharper at 103 than most people are at 30. She survived to that age precisely because she wasn't superstitious. She was practical. Those rules kept her alive. The certainty in his voice killed my smile. "Earl, you can't seriously—" "Your grandmother," he interrupted. "Margaret, you ever meet her?" "She died before I was born. Cancer, I think my mother said." "Lung cancer, yes, but that's not what broke her." Earl set down his mug with deliberate care. "Margaret grew up in this house, left for the city when she was 18. Didn't believe in any of it. Called it mountain superstition, embarrassed by her mother's ways. She came back in 1973 to visit, stayed 2 nights. He paused, his eyes distant. I was the one who found her on the 3rd morning wandering in the woods in her nightgown. She was 36 years old, Sarah. When we got her to the hospital, her hair had gone completely white. All of it overnight. She couldn't speak for 6 months, and when she finally did, she never talked about what happened. Never came back here. Died 15 years later, but something in her had already died in this house." The kitchen suddenly felt colder. "What are you saying happened to her?" "I'm saying she didn't follow the rules. I'm saying she thought she knew better than 4 generations of Holloways who'd lived on this land." Earl stood, his chair scraping against the linoleum. "Your great-grandmother lasted 103 years by following those rules to the letter, never deviating, not even once. You want to ignore them, that's your choice. But don't say nobody warned you." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. Tonight you'll hear footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate, circling the house. Rule number 1 says don't open the door. I'm telling you now, don't even look out the window to see what's making them. Some things, once you've seen them properly, you can't unsee." Then he was gone, his truck rattling back down the drive, leaving me alone with the gathering darkness and a creeping certainty that I couldn't quite dismiss as easily as I wanted to. I locked the doors, all of them. Then I checked them again. The letter said to leave milk and bread on the back porch before dark, and though I felt absurd doing it, I poured milk into a bowl and set it on the weathered boards along with a slice of bread from the loaf I'd found in the bread box. The food looked lonely and strange there, an offering to nothing. Darkness fell completely. I turned on lights in every room I occupied, the house blazing against the night. I tried to read, to distract myself, but couldn't focus. The silence was so complete it had weight pressing against my eardrums until I could hear my own heartbeat. At 10:47 p.m. I heard the first footstep. It was on the front porch, directly outside the living room where I sat frozen, a book forgotten in my lap. A heavy, deliberate step, the wood creaking under weight. Then another. Then another. Something was walking slowly across the porch, the footsteps measured and even, heading toward the corner of the house. I stood without deciding to, moving toward the window. Earl's warning echoed, "Don't even look," but my hand was already at the curtain. The footsteps reached the corner, turned, and began to move along the side of the house. Circling. Rule number 1. Never open the door after sunset, no matter who or what calls to you. It didn't say anything about windows. My fingers touched the curtain fabric. Outside, the footsteps continued their slow, methodical circuit. Whatever was making them was in no hurry. The sound was patient, inexorable, as inevitable as a clock ticking. I pulled my hand back. I don't know why. Whether it was Earl's warning, the memory of his description of my grandmother's white hair, or some instinct deeper than reason. But I stepped away from the window, returned to the couch, and sat with my hands clenched together to keep them from shaking. The footsteps continued. Around the house, steady and unchanging, they circled. I counted the circuits. 7 complete revolutions, each taking approximately 4 minutes. On the 8th circuit, they paused at the back door. I could hear them clearly from the kitchen, standing still just outside. So close I could have touched the door and felt vibration from their presence on the other side. Then a voice called out, and my blood turned to ice water. "Sarah? Baby, it's Dad. I'm locked out. Can you let me in?" My father had died 3 years ago. Heart attack at 59, sudden and catastrophic. I'd held his hand as he slipped away in the ICU. "Sarah, please, it's cold out here. I don't know how I got here, but I need help." The voice was perfect. Every inflection, every warmth, exactly as I remembered. Tears sprang to my eyes before I could stop them. "Just open the door, baby girl. No, let me in." My hand was on the deadbolt before I realized I'd moved. The metal was cold under my palm. All I had to do was turn it, let my father in from the cold, help him, except my father was dead. He was ash-scattered in Lake Michigan. I backed away from the door, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The voice called twice more, then fell silent. The footsteps resumed their circuit. They continued until 3:33 a.m. I watched the clock, needing the concrete reality of numbers. Then they stopped, abruptly mid-step. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound had been. I didn't sleep. I sat on that couch until dawn broke over the mountains, gray and cold. When enough light had gathered for me to see clearly, I went to the back porch. The bowl was empty. The bread was gone. There were no crumbs. And in the dust of the porch boards were footprints, not shoe prints. Bare feet, impossibly long and narrow with too many toe impressions. They circled the house 7 times. I went back inside and reread my great-grandmother's letter. This time, I didn't laugh. I spent the next 2 days in a fog of sleep deprivation and creeping dread, jumping at every sound, unable to shake the memory of my dead father's voice calling from beyond the locked door. I told myself there were rational explanations, stress-induced hallucinations, the isolation playing tricks on my perception, maybe even some local prankster taking advantage of the superstitious new owner. But the footprints in the dust remained impossible to explain away, and I found myself following the rules without consciously deciding to. Milk and bread on the porch each evening. Lights burning through the night, eyes on the ground when I had to go outside at dusk. On the 3rd day, Marcus arrived. I heard his rental car before I saw it, the expensive purr of a new engine incongruous on the rutted dirt road. He'd always driven nice cars, status symbols he couldn't quite afford but financed anyway, needing the image they projected. When he climbed out, he looked exactly as I remembered, handsome in a carefully maintained way, wearing clothes that cost too much and signaled urbanity, sophistication, a man who belonged to a world of craft cocktails and contemporary art galleries. "Sarah!" He flashed the smile that had first attracted me, the one I'd eventually learned was a tool he deployed rather than a genuine expression. "I've been calling for days. Why haven't you been answering?" "No cell service," I said flatly, not moving from the porch. "What are you doing here, Marcus?" "I came to see you, to talk." He approached the porch steps, assessing the house with barely concealed disdain. "This is what you left Chicago for? Sarah, come on, this place is—" He searched for a word. "Depressing. You can't seriously be thinking of staying here." "I'm not. I'm selling it." "Good. Smart. So come back with me now. We can work this out. You, me, us. I've had time to think and I realized I made a mistake. We can get past this rough patch." The rough patch. As if my unemployment and his abandonment were weather patterns, temporary and impersonal. I felt anger rising clean and clarifying. "There's no us to get past anything, Marcus. You ended it. I'm here because I inherited property and I need the money to get my life back on track. A life that doesn't include you." His expression hardened. "Fine, if that's how you want to be, but at least let me come in. I drove 11 hours to get here." Against my better judgment, or maybe because I was so starved for familiar company that even Marcus seemed preferable to isolation, I let him inside. He walked through the house making comments, each one a small cut. The outdated decor, the lack of amenities, the creepy rural vibe. He found my great-grandmother's letter on the kitchen table and read it aloud in a mocking tone that made my face burn. Never open the door after sunset. Is this for real? Your great-grandmother was clearly senile, Sarah. This is like something from a bad horror movie. He laughed, the sound sharp and ugly. Don't whistle after dark. Don't look at the woods. What kind of superstitious nonsense? Stop. My voice was harder than I'd intended. Don't talk about her like that. Oh, come on. You don't actually believe this stuff, do you? He was looking at me with something between amusement and concern, as if I were a child insisting monsters lived under the bed. It's obviously just old person paranoia, rural isolation, probably some dementia, and this is what you get. Elaborate delusions written down as rules. I wanted to tell him about the footsteps, about my father's voice, about the impossible footprints in the dust. But looking at his skeptical face, his condescending smile, I knew he'd only mock those too. So I said nothing. The afternoon wore on uncomfortably. Marcus made himself at home in a way that felt invasive, criticizing everything from the water pressure to the lack of good coffee. As the sun began to descend, I felt anxiety rising. I needed him to leave before dark, but he showed no signs of going. You should head back to your hotel, I said at 6:15, watching the shadows lengthen across the fields. I'll leave soon. Relax. He was scrolling through his phone, frustrated by the lack of signal. God, how do people live like this? At 7:30, with dusk settling over the property like a held breath, I went to the back porch to leave the milk and bread. Marcus followed, watching me with barely suppressed laughter. You're actually doing it. You're following the crazy rules. Just leave, Marcus, please. What, afraid the boogeyman will get me? He was standing on the porch now, silhouetted against the darkening tree line, and then, deliberately looking directly at me with a challenging smile, he whistled. It was a jaunty tune, something I didn't recognize, loud and clear in the evening air. Rule number 4, never whistle, sing, or make music of any kind after darkness falls. Marcus, stop! He whistled louder, grinning at my distress. The tune echoed across the fields toward the dark wall of the forest, and the forest whistled back. It wasn't an echo. It was a response. The same melody, perfectly reproduced, but coming from a dozen different points in the woods simultaneously. The sound was wrong, the pitch sliding and distorting at the edges, as if whatever was making it didn't quite understand the mechanics of human music but was trying to imitate it anyway. Marcus's whistle died. His face, just moments ago smug and amused, went slack. The whistling from the woods continued, growing louder, multiplying. 20 sources became 30, became 50, all whistling Marcus's tune in increasingly impossible harmonics, and beneath it a new sound. Branches snapping, underbrush crashing, the sound of large bodies moving through the forest with disturbing speed. Inside, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Inside now. Marcus didn't argue. We ran for the door and I slammed it behind us, throwing the deadbolt, checking the lock twice. Through the window I could see the tree line and shapes emerging from it. Dark forms, moving wrong, their proportions not quite matching any animal I knew. They stayed at the edge of the woods, just visible in the failing light, but the whistling continued, surrounding the house. What the fuck? Marcus breathed. What the fuck is that? I didn't answer. I moved through the house, turning on every light, Marcus following close behind me, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. The whistling continued for 5 minutes, 10, 15, an impossible chorus that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then it stopped as abruptly as it had begun. In the silence that followed, we heard something new. Footsteps. Not the slow, deliberate circling from my first night, but multiple sets moving around the house in different rhythms. And sounds, scratching at the walls, testing the windows, a low, dragging noise across the porch boards. Marcus stood in the center of the living room, his phone clutched uselessly in his hand, all the color drained from his face. This isn't happening. This is some kind of... There's an explanation. A scraping sound came from directly outside the window behind him, and we both spun to look. For just a moment, a hand pressed against the glass, but the proportions were wrong. The fingers too long, too many joints. Then it withdrew, leaving smeared marks that slowly dripped down the pane. We huddled in the living room, every light blazing as the things outside circled and tested and searched for a way in. Marcus didn't speak, his earlier mockery replaced by a fear so profound it seemed to have broken something in him. Once, he started toward the door, muttering about needing to get to his car, and I had to physically hold him back, reminding him of rule number 1. The activity continued until 3:33 a.m., that same time as my first night. Then, just as before, it stopped completely. The silence was sudden and total. I approached the window carefully and looked out. The yard was empty. Nothing moved in the pre-dawn darkness. When gray light finally broke over the mountains, Marcus was already packed. He didn't meet my eyes, didn't explain, just walked out to his rental car with his bag. He paused at the driver's door, looking back at the house, at me standing on the porch, at the dark wall of forest beyond. "You should leave," he said, his voice hollow. "Whatever your great-grandmother was protecting herself from, it's real, and you're not safe here." Then he got in his car and drove away, too fast on the rutted road, desperate to put distance between himself and this place. I watched until his taillights disappeared into the trees, then went back inside. On the kitchen table, the rule sheet seemed to accuse me. My guest had violated the rules and something had responded. The milk and bread I'd left last night were gone. I checked, even though I dreaded going outside. The bowl was licked clean and there were marks in the dust of the porch. Those same impossible footprints, dozens of them overlapping and confused, as if many things had congregated here during the night. I was alone again, but this time the isolation felt different. Less like solitude and more like abandonment, as if I'd been left behind to face something that Marcus had gotten to escape. After Marcus left, the farmhouse felt larger, the silence deeper. I spent that day in a numb state, moving through rooms without purpose, trying to process what had happened the night before. The rational part of my mind, the part that had been raised on science and reason, that had never believed in anything it couldn't measure, kept searching for explanations. Group hallucination, gas leak, some elaborate hoax. But the explanations fell apart under scrutiny, and I was left with the undeniable reality. Something lived in those woods, something that responded to violations of the rules, something that my great-grandmother had spent a century learning to coexist with. I needed answers. I needed context, and I remembered the one place in the house I hadn't fully explored, the attic. The pull-down ladder groaned when I lowered it, the hinges stiff with age. The space above was dim and hot, insulated poorly, filled with the accumulated debris of a long life. Cardboard boxes, old furniture, trunks with tarnished brass fittings. Dust motes swirled in the single shaft of light from a gabled window. I began searching methodically, opening boxes to find old photographs, tax documents, letters from people long dead. In the third trunk I opened, beneath a wedding dress yellowed with age, I found them. Journals, dozens of them leather-bound and cloth-covered, spanning decades. The earliest was dated 1947, the year my great-grandmother and her husband had bought the property. The most recent was from 6 months ago, just before she died. I carried them all downstairs and spread them across the kitchen table, organizing them chronologically. Then I began to read. The early entries were mundane: weather observations, crop notes, the daily rhythms of farm life. May's voice came through clearly, practical, intelligent, unsentimental. She and my great-grandfather had bought the property cheap, aware that previous owners never stayed long, but confident they could make it work. The first mention of anything unusual came 3 months after they'd moved in. September 18th, 1947. Found the milk and bread we'd left on the porch completely gone this morning. No sign of animals, no tracks, no mess. James thinks it's raccoons, but I've seen raccoons feed. This was different. Everything simply vanished. Bowl licked clean. The old woman from the next property over, Mrs. Hicks, must be 80 if she's a day, stopped by today. She looked at the house for a long time, then said, "You've been leaving offerings." It wasn't a question, she knows. I asked what she meant, and she just said, "Keep doing it. Every night without fail, they remember when you forget." I felt a chill reading that. The rules my great-grandmother had left me weren't her invention. They were inherited, passed down from previous occupants. This had been going on longer than my family's tenure here. The entries continued, documenting a gradual education. My great-grandmother learned through trial and error, through whispered advice from neighbors who spoke in careful euphemisms, through experiences she documented in increasingly disturbed prose. October 31st, 1948. Heard voices calling from the woods tonight. James's father, who died last spring. The voice was perfect. His accent, his way of speaking, everything. James nearly went to him before I stopped him. We held each other in the kitchen until the calling stopped. Whatever is out there, it learns our dead. It knows who we've lost. March 12th, 1949. Made the mistake of looking directly at the tree line during dusk. Can't describe what I saw. My eyes won't make sense of it. Shapes that are both there and not there, like something is trying to push through from somewhere else. Had nightmares for 3 nights afterward. Will be more careful. July 4th, 1951. James whistled while working on the porch after dark. Didn't think. Just did it absent-mindedly. The woods answered immediately, dozens of voices whistling back. They surrounded the house for hours. In the morning, found dead birds scattered across the yard. 19 of them arranged in a circle around the porch. They were perfectly preserved, not a mark on them, but stiff and cold as if they'd been dead for weeks. James doesn't whistle anymore. The journals documented close calls, narrow escapes, the gradual codification of rules that kept them safe. And then I reached the entry from 1952, October 15th, 1952. James is gone. It's been 3 days. Sheriff came out again today, but they've stopped searching. The dogs won't go into the deep woods, refuse absolutely, and the men are spooked. I know where he is, though they won't find him. Last Tuesday, James heard his name called from the woods just after sunset. It was his mother's voice, dead 5 years now. I begged him not to go, reminded him of everything we'd learned, but he said he just wanted to see, just needed to know. He took a lantern and walked into the trees. They found him yesterday morning, 2 miles into the forest. The sheriff wouldn't let me see the body, but I heard the deputies talking. They said he looked like he'd aged 50 years. They said his hair had gone white. They said his face was frozen in an expression they couldn't describe, wouldn't describe. The official cause of death will be heart failure. The truth is that he broke rule number 7 and the things in the woods took him. I am alone now. I am 33 years old, a widow, and I'm bound to this land by something I don't understand but must respect. The house is mine, and so is the responsibility. The rules are not suggestions, they are the price of survival. I had to stop reading for a moment. My great-grandfather's fate too vivid, too terrible. He'd been 40 when he died. The entry was accompanied by a photograph, a handsome man with kind eyes who didn't know the horror that awaited him. My great-grandmother had lived another 70 years after his death, alone with her rules and her offerings, maintaining a boundary that protected not just herself, but I was beginning to suspect others as well. I continued reading, skipping forward through the decades. The entries became more analytical, as if May were studying a phenomenon and documenting her findings. June 3, 1963. Have been observing patterns. The activity intensifies during new moons, especially in autumn. They seem to grow stronger then, more bold. The offerings aren't food in any conventional sense. I've watched from the upstairs window, never directly, always peripheral vision. The things that take the milk and bread aren't eating, they're absorbing. The food simply disappears on contact, as if passing through a membrane into somewhere else. November 21st, 1970. Spoke with Earl today about the history of this land. He's been researching at the county library. The Cherokee called this area something that translates roughly to the hollow place, or where they wait. They wouldn't settle here, wouldn't hunt here. When the first white settlers arrived in the 1790s, they tried to establish a homestead on this exact property. The family, parents, and 4 children disappeared in 1793. No bodies were ever found. Since then, 23 different families have occupied this land. None stayed longer than 5 years except for us. We're approaching our 24th year, and I believe I know why we've lasted. We follow the rules. We make the offerings. We acknowledge them. The realization crept over me slowly. This wasn't about my family specifically. The farmhouse sat on land that had been wrong long before anyone built anything here, a place where boundaries were thin, where something waited with patient alien hunger. In the journals from the 1970s, I found entries about my grandmother Margaret's visit, July 12, 1973. Margaret arrived today with her husband and young Sarah, my granddaughter, just 3 years old. It's good to see them, but Margaret has changed. She's embarrassed by this place, by me, by what she calls mountain superstition. She works for a bank in Louisville now, wears smart clothes, speaks with an accent that tries to hide her origins. She looked at the rules I keep posted and rolled her eyes. I tried to explain, tried to make her understand, but she cut me off. I grew up here, Mother, and nothing ever happened to me. Because nothing is there. You've let isolation make you paranoid. July 14, 1973. Last night was terrible. Margaret refused to follow the rules, said she wouldn't participate in my delusions. She didn't leave the offering. She went outside after dark to smoke a cigarette. She whistled, and they came. They came in force, more than I've ever experienced, drawn by her defiance, her disbelief. The house shook with their testing. Her husband took little Sarah upstairs and held her, covering her ears. Margaret stood at the window and watched, and I know she saw them. I know she saw what they are. She didn't speak for the rest of the night. July 15, 1973. They left early this morning. Margaret's hair has gone white, completely white overnight. She's in shock, can't form coherent sentences. Her husband thinks it's a stroke or an aneurysm, but I know better. She looked into the hollow places too long. She saw them clearly, without the protection of the rules, and something in her broke. Earl helped me load them into their car. Margaret wouldn't look at me, wouldn't look at the house. She left little Sarah's favorite doll on the porch in her haste to leave. I keep it in the locked room upstairs, a reminder of what defiance costs. I felt sick reading that, understanding now what Earl had meant. My grandmother had survived but was never the same. What had she seen? What did those things show her that could break a mind so completely? The final journals from the last decade of May's life showed a woman who'd achieved a kind of equilibrium but was exhausted by the weight of it. March 8, 2018. I am 98 years old. I've outlived my husband by 66 years, outlived my daughter Margaret, who died of cancer last year, never having recovered from what happened here. I've lived with the hollow folk, that's what the old families called them, for 7 decades. I've kept the boundaries, maintained the covenant, but I'm tired, so very tired. October 30th, 2022, Sarah Chen, my great-granddaughter, named for my little granddaughter who was here that terrible night in '73, just graduated from college. She's working in Chicago as a graphic designer. She doesn't know anything about this place, about what waits here. I've thought about reaching out, warning her, preparing her. But how do you prepare someone for this? How do you pass on this burden? I've made arrangements in my will. She'll inherit the property. And I've written the rules down clearly, simply, hoping she's smart enough to follow them before she learns the hard way why they exist. The last entry was dated 3 weeks before May died. January 5th, 2023. The hollow folk are restless. I can feel it. 71 years of living with them has given me a sense for their moods, their rhythms. They know I'm dying. They're patient things, ancient things, but they're hungry too. The boundary has been maintained by my family for 4 generations now, since 1947. Before that, others held it, going back to the first homestead. But the line is weakening. I won't last another October, another new moon ritual. Sarah will inherit this responsibility, and I pray she's strong enough. The rules are simple, but following them for a lifetime requires a kind of endurance I'm not sure exists in her generation. Still, she's a Holloway by blood, and we've always been stubborn. Perhaps that will be enough. I closed the final journal, my hands shaking. The magnitude of what I'd inherited was becoming clear. This wasn't just a property, it was a responsibility, a burden that had been passed down through generations. My great-grandmother hadn't just survived here, she'd been a guardian, keeping something contained, maintaining a boundary that protected more than just herself. Outside, the sun was setting. I'd been reading for hours without noticing the passage of time. I rushed to prepare the evening offering, placing milk and bread on the back porch just as the last light faded from the sky. The forest was dark now, a solid wall of shadow, and I could feel a tension upon me. Patient, expectant, waiting. I went back inside and locked the door. Then I pulled out the journals again and began making notes, preparing myself for what I now understood was coming. October's new moon, and the ritual that would determine whether I could maintain what my great-grandmother had kept for 71 years. I found Earl's number written in the back of the most recent journal and called from the house's landline. He answered on the second ring as if he'd been expecting me. "You've been reading May's journals," he said. Not a question. "Yes. Can you come over? I need to understand what I'm dealing with." "I'll be there in 10 minutes. He arrived as twilight deepened, moving quickly from his truck to the porch, respectful of the hour. Inside, he looked older than he had during his first visit, the lines in his face carved deeper, his eyes carrying a weariness that went beyond age. I'd made coffee, needing the ritual of it. We sat at the kitchen table with May's journals spread between us, a family history written in fear and determination. "How much do you know?" Earl asked. "I know this has been going on since before my family bought the property. I know my great-grandfather died because he broke the rules. I know my grandmother." I paused, the words catching. "I know she survived, but it broke something in her." Earl nodded slowly. "I was here that night, July 14th, 1973. I was 36 years old, still helping May maintain the property like I'd been doing since I was a boy. Margaret was my cousin too, though we'd never been close. She'd left for the city and made it clear she thought she was better than those of us who stayed. I tried to warn her that evening when I saw her going outside after dark. She laughed at me, said I was as crazy as her mother. He paused, staring into his coffee cup as if it held memories he'd rather not revisit. They came hard that night, harder than I'd ever seen. The hollow folk, we call them. The old families have other names, but that's what stuck with me. They surrounded the house completely, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. You couldn't see them clearly, even with the porch light on. They existed in the spaces between light and shadow, always in your peripheral vision, never quite there when you looked directly. But you could feel them. Their hunger, their interest. They were drawn by Margaret's defiance like sharks to blood in the water. "What are they?" I asked. The question I'd been afraid to voice. Earl was quiet for a long moment. "I don't rightly know. May and I spent decades trying to understand. The Cherokee wouldn't speak of them directly, but the fragments we found suggested they're old. Older than the tribes, older than these mountains. They exist in thin places, places where the boundary between our world and somewhere else is weak. This land is a thin place, has been since long before anyone built anything here." He pulled one of the journals toward him, opening it to a page he seemed to know by heart. May documented everything she learned. The hollow folk aren't ghosts. They're something else entirely. They exist in between, not fully in our world or theirs. They're drawn to human presence, human emotion, human grief. They feed on it somehow, or maybe they're just fascinated by it. They mimic because that's how they understand us, by copying our voices, our faces, our memories. But they're not those people. They're just wearing them, like clothes that don't quite fit. "The rules," I said. "Why do they work?" That's what May spent 70 years trying to figure out. The best she could determine is that the rules are a form of covenant, a contract, if you will. By following them, by making the offerings, by acknowledging the hollow folk's presence without directly confronting them, we maintain a balance. They stay contained here, mostly. They don't spread beyond these woods. In exchange, they don't... He trailed off. "Don't what?" "Don't take everyone who lives here, just those who break the rules." Earl's voice was heavy. "Your great-grandfather, James, he was a good man. Smart, brave, worked hard. But one moment of weakness, of grief for his dead mother, and he walked into those woods. I helped search for him. When we found his body..." He closed his eyes. "I was 22 years old. I'd never seen anything like it. He looked ancient, Sarah. 90, maybe 100 years old, even though he was 40. And his face, the expression on it, was of someone who'd seen something so terrible, so vast, that his mind couldn't survive the knowledge. The official report said heart failure. That was mercy for May, letting her bury him without too many questions. And my grandmother? What did she see?" Earl stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dark woods. "I don't know. She never spoke of it, not to anyone. But I saw her that morning, saw her wandering in the nightgown, hair white as snow, eyes staring at nothing. Whatever the hollow folk showed her, when she looked at them directly, without the protection of the rules, it took something from her. The color from her hair, the words from her mouth, maybe part of her soul. She lived another 40-some years, but she was never whole again." He turned back to me, and his expression was grave. "You understand what May left you? It's not just a house and land. It's a responsibility. Someone has to maintain the boundary, keep the covenant. Someone has to live here and follow the rules, or the hollow folk will spread. They'll move beyond these woods, reach the other properties, the town." May believed, and I believe, that we're keeping something contained that should never be set loose. The weight of it settled on me like a physical thing. I was going to sell the property, use the money to get back on my feet. "You can't sell it," Earl said flatly. "Who would buy it? And even if you found someone, would you pass this burden to them unknowing? Would you be responsible for what happens when they inevitably break the rules because they don't understand? Then what am I supposed to do? The question came out almost as a plea. Earl returned to the table and sat down heavily. He looked every one of his 87 years. What May did, what her predecessors did, you survive, you maintain the boundary. You follow the rules without exception, especially during October's new moon. The 9th rule. She mentioned old words, a ritual. What is that? Earl's expression darkened. That's the heart of it. During the 3 nights of the new moon in October, when they're strongest, when the boundary is thinnest, someone has to keep vigil. Every light in the house must burn. You cannot sleep. If you sleep, the boundary fails. And every hour you must read the old words aloud. They're in the locked room upstairs. May said not to open that room. That rule is for the other 11 months of the year. In October, during the new moon, you must open it. Inside, you'll find what you need for the ritual. He paused, choosing his words carefully. The room contains objects from everyone who's died maintaining this boundary. May kept them as anchors, maybe, or reminders. Her husband's pocket watch, her daughter's doll from that night in 1973, items from the families before going back to the 1790s, and a Bible, very old, with words written in the margins in Cherokee and English. You read those words and they strengthen the boundary for another year. What happens if I don't? The boundary fails. The hollow folk cross over completely. They're contained here because of the covenant, but they're patient things and they're always testing, always looking for weakness. Miss one night of the new moon ritual, fall asleep for even an hour, and they'll come through. And once they're through, Earl shook his head. May believed they'd spread like a cancer, moving from property to property, town to town, feeding on grief and loss wherever they went. I don't know if that's true. I don't want to find out. We sat in silence for a long moment. Outside, full darkness had fallen, and I could hear the first footsteps beginning their nightly circuit of the house. I'm scared, Earl. The admission felt like weakness, but I couldn't hold it back. Good. Fear keeps you careful, keeps you alive. He reached across the table and gripped my hand with surprising strength. May was scared every day for 71 years, but she did what needed doing. You're her blood, Sarah. You're a Holloway, even if you carry the Chen name. There's stubbornness in that bloodline, a kind of endurance that most people don't have. May believed you could do this, or she wouldn't have left it to you. What if I can't? Earl's grip tightened. Then we'll all pay the price. But I don't think you'll fail. I've been watching you this past week. You followed the rules even when you didn't believe. You survived Marcus's violation without opening the door. You're learning fast, the way May did. You just need to decide if you're willing to accept this burden. After Earl left, I sat at the table for hours, listening to the footsteps circling, thinking about my great-grandmother spending 71 years in this house, maintaining a boundary against something vast and hungry and patient. I thought about my life in Chicago, the career that had evaporated, the relationship that had failed, the debts and disappointments that had brought me here. I thought about what Earl had said. Someone had to maintain the boundary. The moon calendar on May's wall showed October's new moon was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks to prepare for 3 nights that would determine whether I could do what my great-grandmother had done for 7 decades. 3 weeks to decide if I was strong enough to become what she had been. A guardian, a warden, a keeper of terrible knowledge. I pulled the journals toward me and began to read again, this time taking notes, preparing for what was coming. Outside, the hollow folk circled and waited, patient as always. They knew what I didn't yet fully understand. I'd already made my choice. The moment I'd followed the first rule, the moment I'd placed that first offering on the porch, I'd bound myself to this place and its responsibilities. I was a Holloway now, in all the ways that mattered. The next 3 weeks passed in a strange, suspended state. I fell into the rhythm of the rules as if I'd been following them my whole life. Offerings every evening, lights burning through the night, eyes averted from the tree line at dusk. I stopped questioning, stopped analyzing, simply accepted that survival meant compliance. Earl visited every few days, bringing supplies and information. He taught me the patterns he and May had observed. The Hollow folk were more active on overcast days, almost dormant during full moon, strongest during the new. They responded to strong emotions, grief, fear, anger, like hounds to a scent. The key was to remain calm, measured, to give them nothing to feed on beyond the nightly offerings. May used to meditate, Earl told me, not in any spiritual sense, just practiced emptiness, made herself boring to them. That's part of how she lasted so long. I practiced the old words from the Bible in the locked room, which Earl had helped me open on a bright afternoon when they were least active. The room was exactly as May had described, a small space, more shrine than bedroom, filled with objects that carried the weight of loss. My great-grandfather's pocket watch, its hands stopped at 8:47. A child's doll with button eyes worn from handling. Older items, a woman's hair comb from the 1800s, a man's pipe, a hand-forged knife. Each was a memorial to someone who'd lived here, who'd kept the boundary, who'd paid the price. The Bible was old beyond reckoning, its pages yellow and brittle. In the margins of Psalms and Proverbs, someone, many someones, judging by the different hands, had written words. Some in English, some in Cherokee syllabary, some in a language I couldn't identify. Earl explained these were the old words, a prayer incantation that strengthened the boundary. I practiced reading them aloud, stumbling over the unfamiliar phonetics. "You'll have to do this every hour for 3 nights without sleep," Earl reminded me. "The words have to be spoken aloud, clearly. If you miss an hour, if you fall asleep, the boundary fails." October arrived with unseasonable cold, frost coating the fields in the mornings. The woods seemed darker, the silence heavier. I could feel the anticipation building, something vast and patient drawing closer as the moon waned toward darkness. On October 15th, exactly 1 week before the new moon, it happened. I was in the kitchen preparing the evening offering when I heard it, a child's voice crying in the woods. It was high and thin and utterly heartbroken, the sound of a little girl lost and terrified. "Help me," the voice sobbed. "Please, someone help me, I can't find my mommy." I froze, the bowl of milk in my hands. Rule number 7. If you hear your name called from the woods, it is never who you think it is. But this wasn't calling my name. It was just a child crying. "Please," the voice came again, closer now. "It's so dark. I'm scared. Please help me." Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to go out there, to find this lost child, to help. I was already moving toward the door before I caught myself. No, this was a test. This had to be a test. But what if it wasn't? What if there really was a lost child out there and I was letting my paranoia keep me from helping? I set down the bowl with shaking hands and went to the window. The sun hadn't fully set yet. Maybe if I looked I could see something, confirm either way. At the tree line, barely visible in the failing light, I saw her. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, wearing a nightgown that seemed to glow in the dusk. She was standing perfectly still, facing the house. As I watched, she raised one arm and waved. "Sarah," she called, and her voice was suddenly clear, no longer crying. "Sarah, come play with me." My blood turned to ice. She'd used my name, and now that I could see her clearly, something was wrong with her proportions. Her arm was too long, her head tilted at an angle that necks didn't bend. Sarah, don't you want to help me? Don't you want to be a good person? The little girl took a step forward out of the shadows, and I could see her face clearly now. It had no features, just smooth skin where eyes and nose and mouth should be. But the voice continued, emanating from that blank surface. Come outside, Sarah, come help. That's what good people do, isn't it? They help lost children. They don't leave them alone in the dark. I backed away from the window, my heart hammering. The crying resumed, but now I could hear what Earl had described. It was a perfect loop, mechanical, no breath sounds between the sobs. The thing out there, the hollow folk wearing the shape of a child, was using my compassion as a weapon, testing whether I valued being good over being safe. Please, it called, the voice shifting, becoming my mother's voice now. Sarah, honey, she's just a little girl. You can't leave her out here. What kind of person would that make you? Tears streamed down my face. I stood in the kitchen 20 feet from the door, every fiber of my being torn between the moral imperative to help and the survival imperative to follow the rules. My hand reached for the doorknob. Then I noticed something that cut through the anguish. The child's crying had no variation. It was exactly the same sob, the exact same words on a perfect loop. Help me, please, someone help me, I can't find my mommy, please. Over and over, identical. Nothing human was that precise. Nothing alive repeated itself with mechanical perfection. I pulled my hand back from the door and stepped away. You're not a child, I said aloud, my voice shaking. You're not anyone. You're just wearing her shape. The crying stopped instantly. For a long moment there was silence. Then a sound came from the woods that I can only describe as laughter, but not human laughter. It had too many tones, too many layers, like a dozen voices layered imperfectly. It echoed across the fields and died away. When I looked out the window again, the figure was gone. I sank to the floor, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. The hollow folk had tested me with the most insidious lure possible, a child in danger, an appeal to my basic humanity. And I'd nearly failed. I'd nearly opened that door, and if I had, I didn't let myself think about what would have happened. Earl found me still sitting on the floor an hour later, alerted by something he wouldn't explain. He helped me up, made me tea, sat with me while I told him what had happened. May wrote about a similar test, he said quietly. In Suro 9, they used the sound of a baby crying. She stood at the door for an hour, her hand on the knob, before she realized it never cried quite right. The pauses were wrong. He looked at me with something like approval. You figured it out faster than she did. That's good, that's very good. It almost worked, I whispered, but it didn't. You're learning, Sarah. You're learning what May spent decades understanding. The hollow folk will use everything human about you against you. Your compassion, your guilt, your need to be good. They'll make you doubt yourself, make you wonder if you're being paranoid or cruel. But the rules exist for a reason. And sometimes survival means accepting that you can't save everyone, especially when everyone isn't really there at all. That night, the footsteps circling the house were different, faster, more agitated. I'd denied them and they were angry. But I'd also proven something to myself. I could resist. Even when every instinct screamed otherwise, I could follow the rules. October's new moon was 5 days away. Whatever was coming, I was as ready as I could be. The new moon arrived with the first real cold snap of autumn, temperatures plunging into the 30s. I'd spent the preceding days preparing, stocking firewood, checking every light bulb in the house, laying out supplies I'd need to stay awake for 72 hours. Earl had brought me caffeine pills, energy drinks, protein bars, anything that might keep me conscious and alert through 3 nights without sleep. May used to pinch herself, Earl said as he helped me prepare. Kept a rubber band around her wrist, would snap it whenever she felt drowsy. Pain is a good motivator, Also, keep moving, don't sit down if you can help it. The moment you get comfortable is when you'll drift off. The first night began at sunset on October 22nd. I went through the house systematically, turning on every single light, overhead fixtures, lamps, even the closet lights. The house blazed against the gathering darkness, and I could feel the attention of the woods focusing on that light like eyes adjusting to a sudden glare. At 8 p.m. I read the old words for the first time. They felt strange in my mouth, the Cherokee syllables particularly difficult, but I pushed through, reading slowly and clearly from the ancient Bible. The words had a weight to them, a resonance I could almost feel physically. When I finished, the air in the house seemed subtly different, clearer somehow, as if a pressure had been momentarily relieved. The footsteps began at 8:30, but they were different tonight. Not the slow, deliberate circling, but multiple sets moving in different patterns, coming from different directions. It sounded like a crowd had gathered around the house. At 9 p.m., I read the old words again, then at 10 p.m., then 11 p.m. By midnight of the first night, I was already fighting exhaustion. I'd been running on adrenaline for days, and my body wanted to collapse. I paced the house, snapping the rubber band on my wrist, drinking bitter coffee, forcing myself to stay alert. That's when the house began to change. It started subtly. I walked from the kitchen to the living room, a distance I'd crossed hundreds of times, but the hallway seemed longer. Not by much, just a few extra feet, but enough to notice. I stopped, stared, walked back. The kitchen was exactly where it should be. I turned around and walked to the living room again. The hallway was normal length. I shook my head. Sleep deprivation was already affecting my perception. At 1 a.m. I read the old words. My voice was hoarse now, the strange syllables feeling like gravel in my throat. At 2 a.m. I saw her. I was passing through the living room when I caught movement from the corner of my eye. A woman sat in the rocking chair by the window, the chair that had been empty seconds before. She was elderly, with silver hair and a face I recognized from photographs. Great-grandmother? The word escaped before I could stop it. She smiled at me but didn't speak. She looked peaceful, content, younger than the 103-year-old woman who died months ago. She was knitting, the needles clicking in a rhythm that matched the footsteps circling outside. I approached slowly. You're not real. You're one of them, wearing her shape. The woman in the chair continued knitting, unbothered by my words. Then she looked up at me and I saw that her eyes were wrong. Too dark, too deep, like looking into wells that had no bottom. You're doing well, child, she said in my great-grandmother's voice. But you're so tired. It's all right to rest, just for a moment. Close your eyes for just a moment. No. I backed away, my heart pounding. You're not her. May would never tell me to break the rules. The thing wearing May's face tilted its head, studying me. Are you sure? Maybe I learned at the end that the rules were just chains. Maybe I want to free you from them. Get out of my house, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. It smiled, wider than any human smile should go. Then it simply wasn't there anymore. The rocking chair was empty, still rocking gently, the motion gradually slowing. At 3 a.m. I read the old words, but it was harder now. The letters seeming to move on the page, my tongue stumbling over pronunciations I'd practiced 100 times. The second night was worse. Rooms were definitely the wrong size now. The upstairs hallway stretched impossibly long, the bedroom doors spaced too far apart. When I looked out the window, the barn seemed closer than it should be, looming larger, its walls breathing in and out with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. Figures appeared throughout the house, people I knew and people I didn't. My father sat at the kitchen table, looking healthy and alive, smiling at me. Marcus stood in the doorway, apologizing, begging me to come outside where we could talk properly. A woman in 19th century dress walked through the living room as if I weren't there, whispering to herself in a language I didn't understand. I ignored them all, kept reading the old words every hour, kept every light burning, kept moving even as my legs trembled with exhaustion and my vision blurred. At 2 a.m. on the second night, I made my mistake. I was in the living room swaying on my feet when my eyes closed, just for a second, just a momentary lapse. I jerked awake, had I been asleep for seconds or hours, and immediately knew something was wrong. The house was silent. The footsteps had stopped. The whispers had ceased. In the terrible quiet, I heard it, the back door opening. No. I'd locked it, I'd checked it a dozen times, but I could hear it clearly, the door swinging wide, hinges creaking, admitting the October night. I ran to the kitchen. The back door stood open, revealing darkness so complete it seemed solid. And in that darkness, shapes moved. They came inside slowly, deliberately, a procession of wrong things wearing familiar shapes. I saw my father, my mother, Marcus, May, people I'd never met but whose faces I somehow recognized from old photographs, all the Holloways who'd lived and died maintaining this boundary. They walked through my kitchen with those two long limbs, those faces that didn't quite fit their skulls, those eyes that reflected light like animals. "You slept," one of them said in a voice like wind through a hollow tree. "The boundary failed. You failed." I backed against the kitchen counter, my exhausted mind struggling to process what was happening. Had I really slept? Or was this another hallucination, another test? The figures spread through the house, touching things, examining them with alien curiosity. One ran its fingers along the wall, leaving trails of shadow. Another opened cabinets, removing dishes and setting them on the floor in patterns that hurt to look at. "We've been so patient," another said, this one wearing the face of a young woman I didn't recognize. "4 generations of your family keeping us bound. But you're tired, aren't you, Sarah? So tired. Let it end. Let us be free." From the living room came the sound of footsteps ascending the stairs, heavy, multiple sets heading toward the locked room. No, whatever this was, hallucination or reality, I couldn't let them reach that room. The objects there, the anchors, the Bible with the old words. If they destroyed those. I grabbed the Bible from where I'd left it on the kitchen table and ran. The figures didn't try to stop me, they simply watched, patient and curious as I stumbled through the house to the stairs. My vision swam with exhaustion, the walls breathing in and out, the floor tilting beneath me. I reached the locked room just as something inside began to pound on the door from within. Boom, 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 trying to break out. I fumbled with the key, got the door open and saw them, things that had forced their way into the memorial space, touching the precious objects, contaminating them with their presence. "Stop," I shouted, my voice breaking. "This room is protected, you can't—" One of them turned to face me, and for the first time I saw one of the hollow folk clearly without any mask or mimicry. I can't describe it properly, my mind won't hold the memory. It was tall and thin and seemed to exist in more dimensions than 3, folding in on itself in ways that geometry couldn't accommodate. Looking at it felt like vertigo, like falling, like my brain was trying to process information it wasn't designed to handle. "Read the words, Sarah." It was Earl's voice coming from behind me. I spun to see him on the stairs, but he was translucent, not quite there. "I'm not really here. I'm home sleeping, but May and I worked out a way for me to help during the vigil. Read the words now. You haven't missed the hour, you only slept for seconds. This is all a test, one last test to see if you'll hold the boundary even when you think it's failed." Was he real? Was any of this real? I didn't know, couldn't know. but I knew how to read the old words. I opened the Bible with shaking hands and began to speak. The syllables felt different now, heavier, charged with desperate need. The things in the room recoiled from the sound, their shapes distorting further, becoming harder to perceive. I kept reading, my voice gaining strength, the words flowing more easily as if the Bible itself were helping me pronounce them correctly. The shapes began to withdraw, folding back into themselves, retreating toward the open door. "You would bind us still," one of them said, its voice full of something that might have been respect or might have been rage. "You would maintain the covenant even unto breaking. Very well, Holloway, very well." They flowed out of the room like smoke down the stairs through the kitchen. I followed, still reading the old words, speaking them like a prayer or a weapon. When I reached the back door, still standing open, I could see them retreating into the woods, dozens of figures that were never quite there, fading back into the spaces between. I finished reading the old words, then slammed the back door shut and locked it. The house was suddenly completely silent. I checked my watch. 2:58 a.m. I hadn't missed the 3 o'clock reading. Earl had been right, or the thing wearing Earl's voice had been right. I'd only slept for seconds, and everything that followed had been a test. I sank to the floor and wept, too exhausted even to be frightened anymore. The third night I was beyond exhaustion. I existed in a strange state where reality and dream seemed to have merged, where I couldn't always tell what was actually happening and what was hallucination. But I kept reading the old words every hour, kept every light burning, kept moving through the house on legs that barely supported me. The hollow folk were quieter that final night, as if they too were exhausted by the confrontation. Or perhaps they were simply waiting, patient as always, for me to falter one last time. At 4 a.m., as I was preparing to read the old words for what felt like the 100th time, there was a knock at the front door. I froze. Rule number 1, never open the door after sunset. But a voice came through the door, calm, measured, not mimicking anyone I knew. "Sarah Chen, we would speak with you. We will not enter uninvited, but we would speak." Every instinct screamed at me not to respond, not to acknowledge it. But I was so tired, so worn down by 3 days of sleepless vigilance that rational thought had become difficult. "I'm not opening the door," I called back. "We do not ask you to. We only ask that you listen." Against my better judgment, I approached the door. Through the window, I could see a figure standing on the porch, a man dressed in clothes from a century ago, his face somehow handsome and terrible at once, existing in that uncanny valley between human and other. "You have maintained the boundary," the figure said. 3 nights of vigil without faltering. You have proven yourself worthy of the covenant as May Holloway did before you, as her husband did before her, as all the others did in their time. We acknowledge this. What do you want?" My voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "We want what we have always wanted, freedom, release. Passage into your world fully, completely, not trapped in these thin places, these hollow spaces where we exist but do not live." The figure placed one hand against the door, and I swear I could feel the cold radiating through the wood. "You are the last of the Holloway bloodline. May had no other descendants but you. If you choose to walk away, to break the covenant, we will be free. We will spread beyond these woods, beyond this hollow place, into the wider world. And if I don't walk away, then you become what May was, guardian, warden, keeper of the boundary. You bind yourself to this place as she did, maintain the covenant as she did, follow the rules as she did. For how long? Years, certainly. Decades, perhaps. You will live here alone or nearly so, keeping watch, making offerings, reading the old words every October. You will sacrifice your life to keep us contained." The figure leaned closer, and though the door remained between us, I felt the weight of its attention like a physical thing. "We do not hate you, Sarah Chen. We do not hate May or any who came before. You are simply obstacles, impediments to our desire, but we respect the covenant. We are bound by it as much as you. So we offer you a choice freely made. Walk away, leave this house, sell this land, live your life. We will not pursue you, we will not harm you, but we will be free and we will spread, and others will encounter us who do not know the rules, who have no preparation, no covenant to protect them. I thought of Earl, living a half-mile down the road. I thought of the families in Harlan County going about their lives unknowing. I thought of what the hollow folk would do if they were unleashed into a world full of people who didn't understand them, who would violate rules they'd never been taught. Or, the figure continued, you accept the burden May carried for 71 years. You become the anchor. You maintain the boundary, and we remain here in these hollow places, contained but always present, always testing, always waiting for the covenant to fail. That's not a choice, I said. That's a trap. No, it is a responsibility. There is a difference. The figure stepped back from the door. You have until dawn. When the sun rises, the 3 nights of vigil will be complete. At that moment, you may walk out this door and never return, and we will consider the covenant broken. Or you stay and it continues. Choose wisely, Holloway. The figure dissolved into shadow, and I was alone. I sank to the floor with my back against the door, my mind churning. I could leave. I could get in my car at dawn and drive back to Chicago, back to my old life, or what remained of it. I could try to rebuild, find a new job, start over. The debt, the loneliness, the failure of my previous life would still be there, but at least I'd be free of this. Free to let the hollow folk spread. I thought about May spending 7 decades in this house. She could have left at any time. After her husband died, she could have abandoned the property, walked away. But she stayed. She maintained the boundary, followed the rules, made the offerings because she understood that some responsibilities can't be transferred or abandoned. They can only be carried or shirked at the cost of others' safety. I thought about my grandmother Margaret, who hadn't believed, who'd broken the rules and paid a price that left her broken for the rest of her life. And about my great-grandfather James, who died for one moment of weakness. The sun rose at 6:47 a.m. I watched through the window as the darkness gradually gave way to gray, then pink, then the gold of morning. The 3 nights were complete. The vigil was over. I'd succeeded. And now I had to choose. I stood up, my body aching, my mind still fogged with exhaustion. I walked through the house, touching the walls May had maintained, the floors she'd walked, the rooms where she'd spent 71 years keeping watch. I went upstairs to the locked room and looked at the objects there, memorials to all who'd carried this burden before me. My great-grandfather's pocket watch, my grandmother's doll, items from families I'd never know, stretching back to the first homestead in 1790. They'd all chosen to stay, to maintain the boundary, to protect people they'd never meet from a threat those people would never know existed. At 7 a.m. I made my choice. I went downstairs, prepared the morning's offering of milk and bread, and placed it on the back porch. Then I sat at the kitchen table with May's journals and began writing my own entry. October 25, 2023, completed my first vigil. 3 nights without sleep, maintaining the lights, reading the old words. The hollow folk tested me in every way they could, with compassion, with guilt, with fear, with exhaustion. They offered me freedom if I would break the covenant. I chose to stay. I chose to become what May was, what all my predecessors were. I am the guardian now. The boundary is maintained. The covenant continues. I don't know how long I'll last. May survive 71 years. I may not be that strong, but I understand now what she understood. Some burdens are inherited not because we want them, but because someone must carry them. The hollow folk are real, they are hungry, and they are patient, but so am I. I will maintain the boundary, I will follow the rules, I will keep watch. To whoever reads this after I'm gone, I'm sorry, this is the inheritance I'll leave you. But I'm not sorry for the choice I made. Some sacrifices are made in silence across generations by ordinary people who become extraordinary only in their endurance. I am Sarah Chen. I am a Holloway, and I am the keeper of the boundary. I closed the journal and looked out the window at the woods. They seemed quieter now, less oppressive. The covenant had been renewed, the boundary held. For now. 6 months have passed since that October vigil. The farmhouse is still standing, weathered but solid, its lights burning through each night. I'm still here. I don't look the same. The mirror shows me that much. There's gray in my hair that wasn't there before. Not much yet, but it's coming. My eyes have changed too, carrying a weight that wasn't there 6 months ago. I look like someone who's seen things, known things that most people never will. Earl visits weekly as he promised. He's teaching me the deeper patterns, the subtler rules that May learned over decades. How the hollow folk are more active during storms, how they respond differently to anger than to fear. How to distinguish between what's real and what's mimicry. A skill that requires intuition more than observation. You're doing well, he told me last week. Better than May did her first year. You're a natural at this in a way I'm not sure is good for you. Maybe he's right. I've stopped questioning the strangeness of my life. The nightly offerings are routine now. The footsteps circling the house are like clockwork. I notice more when they're absent than when they're present. I've learned to sleep lightly, to wake at the slightest irregularity, to maintain a constant low-level vigilance that never quite switches off. The debt collectors stopped calling after I made it clear I wasn't leaving. I work remotely now, freelance graphic design, enough to pay utilities and buy supplies. The farmhouse is paid off and my needs are simple. I don't need much money when I never go anywhere, never buy anything beyond necessities. I've started my own journal, continuing the tradition May maintained. I document everything. Patterns in the hollow folks' behavior, variations in how they test the rules, observations about the thin places where they're strongest. Someday, someone else will inherit this property and this burden, and they'll need this information the way I needed May's journals. I write carefully, deliberately, aware that I'm creating a record for a descendant I'll likely never meet. Maybe I'll have children somehow. The isolation makes that seem impossible, but life is long and strange. Or maybe a distant cousin I've never heard of will receive the inheritance as I did, surprised and unprepared. Either way, I'm writing for them. At night, when the house is locked and the lights are burning and the footsteps are circling, I sometimes wonder if I made the right choice. I think about the life I left behind, the career, the relationships, the normalcy. I think about what I gave up to stay here. But then I think about the alternative. I think about the hollow folk spreading beyond these woods, encountering people who don't know the rules, who can't distinguish between what's real and what's mimicry. I think about Earl and his family, about the people in Harlan County, about strangers who would never know they were at risk until it was too late. And I know I made the only choice I could live with. The Woods Watch, patient and eternal. Every evening at dusk, when I carefully avoid looking directly at the tree line, I can feel their attention. The hollow folk are still there, still waiting, still testing. They always will be. This is their nature, to press against boundaries, to search for weakness, to mimic and call and tempt. And it's my nature now to resist them, to maintain the boundary, to follow the rules without exception. I am 29 years old. May live to 103. If I'm lucky, if I'm strong enough, careful enough, vigilant enough, I have 74 years ahead of me in this farmhouse. 74 years of offerings and vigils and isolation. 74 years of being a barrier between the world and what waits in the hollow places. Some nights that thought crushes me with its weight. The prospect of decades spent alone, following rules, reading old words, maintaining a covenant that most people don't even know exists. Other nights, though, I feel something different. Not quite pride. The situation is too grim for that. But a sense of purpose, maybe. A knowledge that what I'm doing matters, even if no one will ever thank me for it, even if I can never explain it to anyone outside this small circle of knowing. I am the guardian now, the keeper, the warden of thin places. Earl tells me that May used to say the hardest part wasn't the fear or the isolation or even the sleepless nights of the October vigils. The hardest part was the question that crept in during quiet moments. Had she been claimed by the thing she was guarding against? Had all those years of vigilance changed her so fundamentally that she was no longer quite human herself? I understand that question now. I feel it in my bones on the coldest nights when the boundary between this world and the hollow places seems thinnest. I see it in the mirror, in the gray hair and the old eyes. I hear it in the way I talk to myself, maintaining a running commentary just to hear a human voice. Am I still Sarah Chen? Or have I become something else, not hollow folk, but not quite human either? Something in between, a threshold creature myself, forever standing at the boundary I maintain. I don't know. I don't think I'll ever know, but I follow the rules. I make the offerings. And when October comes again, I'll read the old words for 3 sleepless nights, and the covenant will hold for another year. This is my life now, my inheritance, my burden, my choice. And in the distance I can hear the highway, the normal world continuing on, oblivious to what watches from the hollow places, oblivious to the ordinary people who stand between them and the darkness. I am one of those people now. I am a Holloway, and I watch back.